Hello and welcome back to another episode of Strong Collectors Comics. I'm your host Jordan, joined by my plucky co-host Dakota. And I think revolution is in the air, folks. Now, years ago, Americans threw tea into the Boston Harbor in protest of the taxes from the king. And if there's one thing that you don't want to come for the nerds, it's our comic books. And we are getting hit, folks, as you may or may not know, with some tariffs. These tariffs are being imposed on Canada, China, and Mexico. Now, while these bring up a lot of concerns for folks, a lot of comic books come from Canada and China. So we're going to be talking a little bit about what these tariffs might mean for increase in comic book prices, because it sounds like that's coming. So, Dakota, as a brief overview here, we have the tariffs being imposed on Canada. Those were actually delayed until March or so. So if those go into effect, the numbers I was hearing was that comic book individual issues could be going up by about $1 per issue.
Right. Yeah. Obviously,
Now,
that's going to depend on like a $4 one is going to go up $1. Todd's books that are a little cheaper, a little less, but yeah,
a little less, but more or less $1.
right.
Like omnibuses, trades, sounds like those are more coming from China, which if those are going into effect, I don't know exactly when we'll see the increases of those kind of collected editions with prices.
Right.
But that's another thing that we could be seeing coming up. Now, Dakota, I know you don't buy as many physical comics. I know you do a lot more digital reading. For me, I was running some of the numbers, and I bought more or less 77 single issues last year.
Which is about 6-ish issues a month. That's not crazy.
Yeah, I don't think it's too wild. It's probably more than I needed to spend. But, you know, if we're averaging $4.50 each, because some of them are more, some of them are around $4, it's about $346.50. If these taxes or tariffs went into effect, I could see an increase to about that would have cost me like $423.50. So, honestly, I mean that's a decent chunk that could be
Right.
going towards buying other comic books.
Yeah, exactly.
Right off the bat, for me, that does make me reconsider how many series I'm going to let myself take a chance on or want to follow through with reading.
True. Which I think is, I mean, we can get into like the prices of it, but just as like comic book stories as a whole, like you said, you're going to take less chances on things. That means you're probably going to, I mean, knowing you, I'm guessing you're probably going to read Batman and maybe you're going to read, some other like creepy thing you read. But like, you're not going to go pick up the new like Metamorpho or something where it's like, I've heard really good things about it, but if you've got to spend that extra money on it, you're like, do I want to commit to this thing? And then those stories that are maybe a little different that still have a good chance of being good stories are not going to get picked up. And that's not necessarily a reflection of how good the writer is doing on that book. It's more a reflection of just like, I don't have the budget to try. But that's going to tell the companies like, oh, we don't want these newer. And they're just going to be like, okay, here's your Batman, here's your Spider-Man. And that's what they think that we want, but we want more, but we can't pay for more. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of things to think about. I think there's that piece of it from the company side of, are we going to publish less stuff that's like bankable because we need to really push out what we know will sell.
Yeah.
I think that's a really fair argument, and I think it makes sense for collecting too to be a little more choosy.
I think
Because sometimes I will pick up a single issue and just be like, I don't really know if I'll like it, but I'll give it a shot. If I don't like it, no big deal. But yeah, if prices are going up, it's like, do I really want to be taking gambles on stuff I might not like if it's going to cost more, and then I'll just be stuck with it?
Yeah. And I think, I mean, obviously for us, like, I'm worried about my own personal wallet. But again, like, zooming out a little bit, I think this is probably going to hurt the comic book stores. Like, your local comic book store is probably going to get hit the hardest. Like, maybe you have to read a few less books a year, but every book that you're not buying is a book that they're not selling. And you're, I think it's easy to just think surface level, like, oh, I've got to spend more, so they're going to make more. But that's not the case. Like, their prices just went up, and now you're going to buy less. That doesn't mean that they're making more because they had to jack up their prices because of these tariffs. That's just less books going out for them, less money coming in, and it's already like, I mean, there are some successful comic book stores that probably don't have to worry too much about it, but there are a lot that are just kind of on that edge of like, it can't be the most profitable business in the world.
Mm-hmm.
If it goes down, then it's just kind of like, it's probably not going to be worth keeping the doors open, and then your comic book store is done.
Yeah, I think there's always been issues with like the viability of the money making for comic book stores. I think
Mm-hmm.
post COVID even that got more difficult just because like I think there was kind of a lot of historically have been a lot of struggles with comic stores, staying up and running anyways.
Mm-hmm.
And then I know we've talked about a lot of the shift to like digital things. Are people buying stuff as much? And yeah, I could definitely see a lot of comic store owners, especially those smaller stores, having to deal with that. I think some bigger stores would be okay, but
Mm-hmm.
it really is, and you see it from the side of the consumer if they're buying less. That makes sense. But I think that's the unfortunate part then is, what will comic book stores do to either make that up?
Mm-hmm.
Will they have to sell less? Will they have to get in fewer things? Which then kind of would affect probably what companies are putting out. So I think all around it results in, whatever you slice it, Dakota, there's going to be fewer comic books getting read, whether they're not getting made, whether they're not getting bought, or not getting sold. I mean, I think that will affect a lot of people for sure.
Yeah.
Um,
Just kind of
that is unfortunate.
Overall net negative for the collector. And this is mainly only an American issue. Like if we have fans listening elsewhere, probably don't need to worry about it as much. But as long as, if you're an American listening to this, net negative.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think there's, I mean, I think, if you don't think about it too much, you can probably say like, oh, well, this is meant to bring more jobs to America. And if these companies would start printing in the U.S., then they wouldn't have to worry about these price increases.
Mm-hmm.
But it's going to be more expensive to print them in the U.S., so you're not really going to save much money by bringing that manufacturing here, because like I didn't even know that like Canada was one of the main producers of comic books, but it's because they have the materials and everything right there. And like, is it worth? Like, I'm sure the U.S. is a ginormous chunk of these companies' market, but at the same time, it's like we can still sell to Canada, we can still sell to Europe. Is it worth helping America? And this is just like the first round of. I mean, like obviously the Canada tariffs haven't like taken hold yet, but this is just the first. Like 25 is like the benchmark. Like they've said, if Canada retaliates with tariffs on the U.S., then the tariffs are going to go higher. So we could be seeing more expensive comics than what we're even talking about right now, too.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's a good point too. Is it could go up, and it also lines up, unfortunately, with the whole diamond distribution thing going on. I'm sure that has been complicated for a lot of people too. I mean, it's like two things at once then, where it's like, how's the distributing going to work out? And then, okay, prices are going up. And it almost could be one of those things where if enough like setbacks line up at once, I mean, people are less likely to say, how can we troubleshoot and get through it, to like, well, I guess we just need to axe this thing, or we need to close this down, or whatever that might be. So yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely, there's a lot of like chain effects or things that could happen one after another. And then another aspect is we haven't quite seen the effects of it, but with tariffs against China, with those trades, omnibuses going up, a lot of people love to collect those. And then I wonder, will as many of those be made, Dakota, or will there be those things where it's like, maybe we were going to print this, but it's already in print, so maybe we're just going to chop that, right? Which I could see almost creating some kind of scarcity where you have those like older books that become more valuable, because it's like, well, if it's not getting reprinted, the one that's out from 20 years ago might be the one to get, which then I guess you can find those things digital, but that's always unfortunate too, because then it can be like...
I was going to say that's going to hurt the digital, because at least with like the Marvel app, usually they only bring comics into the app when they're doing collected editions.
That have been printed. Okay.
Yes, they're usually scanning them as they're being printed, so then that's when you get that on the digital app. So I think, to your point, it is probably going to be more. You got to go back and get that old physical book.
Which, there's cool things about like finding older stuff, but it's also like, is that going to make it harder to access? Like, I want to read this cool series, and it's like, well, you got to buy this edition from 1982 that is
Yeah.
limited run, and then it's like, well, that's really hard to track down. So again, similar thing. It's like they might just be less likely to say, should we print this collection of Crystar or this
Exactly.
old Amethyst set that we really need to make this nice, beautiful omnibus? Oh, wait. Only Jordan's going to buy it. Jordan and
Right.
Dakota are the other ones buying Crystar and Amethyst, so we won't print it. Which I could see that kind of stuff happening. I really could. So that to me is a big bummer because I always love like those when those older series do get printed and do get put out, and you're like, finally, it's easy. I don't have to track these down for the rest of my life.
Yeah, and that's like you said. I don't do a whole lot of the single issues, but I get more of the trades and stuff like that. Like I'll wait for, like I've switched over to doing my spawns that way. I get all the, I haven't got all of them, but like I'm reading through the spawn compendiums, everything like that. It's like I would like to read some of these new Spawn series, but yeah, like the prices are going to go up, and like my whole point of stopping the single issues was to get the trades to make it a little bit cheaper, and now it might be pushing it right back up to be like, well, I ended up not saving any money, so maybe I don't read those books, but
yeah, and then I think that could affect comic sales at comic stores too. So I guess if I were to rank, I think like person getting hurt the most is going to be local comic stores.
right,
I think second after that, maybe we could say collectors, just in the sense of having to choose differently, pay more. And then maybe like the publishers, because I've talked about this before, Dakota. I wouldn't mind if Marvel's like, we're cutting our output in half. I really think that could actually be good for Marvel, because they might need to be like, do we really need to put out this spin-off of something that is like our 7th Spider-Man series this month?
right,
I would be okay if some of their stuff rolled back a bit. So I could see that being an unintended, like forcing them to be like, well, if we put something out, it better be good. Like if they were putting out one Spider-Man series and it cost a little more, I probably would pay more if I knew it was good. But I think with the output, it's hard to imagine the prices going up with the output of comics now. I think if
Right.
the output goes down and price goes up, like there could be some way that they spin that. And I think if I were a company, I'd be thinking about that right now. Like, how
Yeah.
can I make sure my stuff is quality
Mm-hmm.
to retain people buying? And maybe they'd be like, well, I don't need to buy 4 Batman books. I could just buy this one,
Mm-hmm.
but it's really good.
Yeah,
So
and I really don't. I mean,
I
like,
could see
yes, Marvel and DC are going to take a hit, but I think more so it's going to be those indie comics that are more of those like, oh, I'll try this out. This looks interesting.
Right.
When the prices go up, you're going to be much more focused on like, I just get my things that I know I like, and you're not going to try those out. And then those indie publishers are probably going to struggle.
That's right. So I think all around, we'll have to wait and see, folks. Maybe we could do an update as the year moves along here, what we see from these tariffs, the prices of comics. You let us know in the comments. What do you see as the consequences of this? How does this affect your comic purchasing, collecting? Is there anything we missed? Please be letting us know, and be liking, sharing, and subscribing. And until next time, as always, stay strong.